Thank you very much to Samsung and the team for inviting me here to discuss education research, which I thoroughly enjoy to do and to have an audience who's interested. I'm Michael Mott from the University of Mississippi School of Education, and I teach teachers how to teach and conduct research in classrooms to see how we can improve learning. What I'm going to talk about is research that we conducted in classrooms with a certain light specification. And it's something that oftentimes in education we don't think about. We all know that light is extremely important. We intuitively understand that. If you visit a city you have not visited before and it's excellent weather out, you think that you've had a better visit than if it were raining. These are things that we intuitively understand, and yet lighting in schools typically is not optimal. It's somewhat adequate, but it's not as reaching the potential that we need it to be reaching. I think it's often overlooked. So what characteristics of lighting can lead to optimal learning? Thank you. I want to talk about the research overview. When we think about lighting, we think about characteristics. We think about six characteristics of light, and these are psychological constructs, generally grouped into something we call well-being. And well-being isn't simply where you're feeling good, although feeling good is important as a learner. It's more scientific than that. We have visual acuity, the ability of your physiology to enable you to see, and then those neurons to fire then to get to the brain to process that information. We have the circadian rhythm, we have environmental appraisal, and as you can see, we have 6 categories here. The most important one to me is cognition. General cognition is improved with certain specifications of lighting. And there were 3 teams that have looked at this research that we built upon, 2 other teams. We had the Asian team conducting research in Singapore. We had the European team conducting research in the Netherlands with a Philips lighting solution called School Vision, and I'll go into the specifications of that. The way that our US team decided to measure how much is this lighting going to help us was we looked at our state in Mississippi, and we were at the time 47th out of 50th in reading as measured in the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And so we thought we need to measure reading performance with this light specification to see what's going to happen. We also wanted to look at student motivation as well as to affirm whether concentration is increased with certain lighting specifications, and we also use the D2 test of concentration. So let me go forward, and I want you to look at this slide, but don't get too carried away with the numbers. They're very simple, actually. When you look at this slide, what I want you to realize after I'm done with it is exactly what we measured, because if you know specifically what we measured, it will empower you to interpret the research for what you do in your own profession. We measured something called oral reading fluency, which is 3 things. It is the speed at which you read, the rate at which you read, it is how accurate you read, and it is the degree to which you read with expression. Very simply put, if you read too slowly, the physiological limitations of short-term memory dictate that you do not retain what you just read. So oral reading fluency is not exactly comprehension, but it is an index of comprehension. It is a route to comprehension. You cannot comprehend text if you don't have oral reading fluency. Basically, when you look at how what oral reading fluency means in reading, you can see from the chart to your right, as you look at the screen, that fluency is highly related through correlational coefficients to comprehension. That's your takeaway from that slide. There is a whole body of work that looks at fluency and its connection, its relationship to reading well. And so we do need children to have fluency. You can see in the graphic to the left that reading comprehension is the reason that we read, to understand, to have meaning. And in order to do that, again, you see that fluency plays a key role in that. Why didn't we measure reading comprehension? We didn't measure reading comprehension because we had an assessment, an oral reading fluency assessment, already utilized by teachers in schools. In fact, utilized across the United States. And so we didn't have to intrude upon the classroom and the curriculum and require yet another test. We did 2 studies. Both studies were 3rd grade. We had 4 light settings from the School Vision solution, but we only used normal and focus for our research. Focus lighting was very cool in color temperature, 6,500 Kelvin, very high lux, 1,000 lux. You had to see it to believe it. Now, I know the audience here and online, being professionals and engineers and so forth that deal with lighting, you understand what that means. But for most educators, they had to see it to believe it. It was bright, and the children would immediately react to it because it was so different from the normal setting, which varied usually from 4,000 or 5,000 color temperature and lower lux, which was I take it the standard, industry standard or thereabouts. So we looked at normal lighting and focus lighting, and when I refer to normal and focus, these here are the settings that we analyzed. The 4 classrooms that we studied consisted of 4 3rd grade classrooms. 2 classrooms utilized normal lighting during oral reading fluency instruction, and 2 classrooms utilized focus lighting during oral reading fluency instruction. 4 teachers with equivalent methodology in their fluency instruction participated in the study. And before I share with you the results, this is just something, the chart you see before you is something to consider, that when you're teaching children, you have transitions. You move from, in elementary school, you move from activity to activity. And for our study, in the morning time, when reading typically, instruction typically takes place, we activated the focus light setting for 2 of the classrooms. The other 2, of course, had normal. So we can refer to this as the intervening variable, or the interval variable. So we activated the focus lighting for the fluency instruction. Now, aside from our research, this might be a typical way that a classroom teacher would use the lighting, use the calm setting when they come back from lunch or playing outside, when they're a little bit hyper, or after they eat lunch and they have to do something academic. they may feel tired, and so you may want to activate the focus. However, for this study, we only activated focus for the fluency instruction. 84 children in grade 3 in a North Mississippi public school. And the children would obviously chronologically be 7 to 8 in the United States for grade 3. We used a quasi-experimental design. Quasi because we did not, the participants are not randomized. At that time we did the research, it was somewhat expensive to install these lighting in the schools, and so we were limited to 4 classrooms. We also used, to measure the results of the fluency assessment, we use what is called Ames Web, which is an oral reading fluency assessment that is valid and reliable, has been proven to be so countless times in the literature. We also looked at the D2 test of concentration. Was it increased based upon the lighting? Lastly, we wanted to know, did the lighting motivate the children in any way? And there we constructed our own survey, pilot tested it, and then used it. Let me go through the results of study 1. If you look at the blue line, you will see scores that represent how fast, how accurate, and to what degree of expression children read their graded level passage readers. And you can see that the focus group, those 2 classrooms that experienced focused lighting, had increased oral reading fluency scores. The red line indicates those children that experienced oral reading fluency instruction solely with the normal light specification. These results were significant. I'm going to conclude this talk. At the end, I'm going to reaffirm the importance of this finding. For motivation, we found that the focus group had slightly higher motivation, but not statistically significant. We weren't overly concerned with the lack of significance, although in terms of the research that's important. It could be we had low power, not a high enough number of participants, so the statistics were not, the analyses were not able to get to that point of significance. However, motivation was increased, and perhaps with a higher number of participants or a better instrument to measure motivation, we would have found something different. I think the literature is clear that motivation is increased in a myriad of ways with certain lighting specifications. So that was a somewhat interesting finding. The main effect for concentration, as measured by the D2 test of concentration, was insignificant. Now, you ask, if the plethora of other research revealed that concentration is increased with these light specifications, why was it not increased here? Well, the answer is pretty clear. It's because our 3rd grade students had difficulty reading the D2 test of concentration items, and that measure is usually used with older individuals or individuals with higher literacy levels. So take that for what you will. Study 2, we decided, you know what? We studied children that we would call on the normal range of development and academic achievement. What about children defined as at risk? In the United States, we define at risk most commonly with the percentage of kids that receive free or reduced lunch. So essentially, it's a socioeconomic status indicator. It typically is correlated with children that might not have been read to year after year, even prior to them arriving in kindergarten, so literacy levels are lower. Or they may have special neurologic needs, auditory, and so forth. So this was a higher level of participants, but we weren't interested in so much in motivation or the D2 test of concentration. Our participants here would not have, it wouldn't have been a valid finding. They wouldn't have been able to do the items. So let's take a look at the results. When we measured the grade 3 students' oral reading fluency in the 4 classrooms, excuse me, it was more classrooms than that, we saw that, again, focused lighting activated during instruction increased the oral reading fluency of the grade 3 students. You can see that in our repeated measures design, they all start out similarly. This should be very convincing. Was this class much better than that class because all the smart reading kids were here? Well, no. We measured them and they were very similar, and you can see that the increase is fully developed by the 3rd measurement in late in spring. I get a lot of questions from education types. Why is that blue line staying close to the red one in time 2? And the answer most likely is that time 2, that measurement occurs right after Christmas vacation. A lot of playing, not much reading. They're not experiencing the lessons. So we attribute it to possibly, that's possibly why that blue line doesn't take off until the spring. I want to put study 2 results in perspective. The blue line now is the United States. The red line is our focus group, and the green is the group without focus lighting. In Mississippi, at that time, we were 47th or 48th in the United States in reading achievement. And so we have a huge need to improve reading instruction. And you can see that we have some catching up to do. This should give you an idea of how important it is to have the environment optimized for learning and reading in classrooms. A highly trained teacher, temperature, lighting, all of these variables mean something and add up to success. 44th out of 50th, excuse me. Right now, Mississippi is 35th, so we've gone up slightly. We have implemented some methodological changes. Still, when you're 35 out of 50, and the United States is relatively lower than many nations that have less resources. Jamaica has higher reading scores than the US. Tanzania has higher reading scores than the United States, let alone New Zealand, Japan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of work to do in the United States. And this should give you an idea of how important reading instruction is to the children and to our success as a nation, in that they can give back to our communities. Let me conclude with some takeaways. And as you look at this slide, this last slide, we know that fluency is increased. We know that we have a strong feeling, idea that motivation is increased. We also feel that concentration with higher lux and cooler color temperature, yeah, that's going to increase as well. However, our lighting specification, you had to experience it somewhat harsh in the brightness, the lux. And so you couldn't leave it on all day. And so when I was contacted by Dr. Ilio Kim about this new technology, and I saw his chart at the top with the demonstrating the light having high lux, yet not being so cool in its color temperature and not being so high in its lux, I knew that, and it was demonstrated to increase concentration in students. I knew that this is something that could be very beneficial for schools because it has the characteristics of the specification, it has the specs we used, only not so harsh. And teachers could use it all day. Other possible benefits, and I could spend a month going into it. There are so many variables with lighting that we could discuss. But other benefits are that with a warmer lighting and being able to have tunable lighting along the spectrum that Dr. Kim demonstrated, we can promote children's pro-social behaviors. We have an ability to have classroom management in transitions from one activity to the next to make children less anxious, to calm them down, let alone to increase their ability to learn and concentrate, conducting scientific experiments, cooler color temperature, higher lux, coming back from lunch online, classroom management, a warmer color temperature, lower lux. Teachers would grab a hold of this and do things that we wouldn't even know, that they would create technologies just like people do with apps on iPhone. We have no clue what they're going to do, but they're doing creative things. I think the possibility is here too for lighting. With that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you very much.